Great. So, welcome everybody to tonight's Introducing Community Response Plans, which is part of the Risk Ready Communities programme. So, I'm Alice. I'm part of the Risk Ready Communities team, and I work for Communities Prepared, which is one of the partners delivering this programme. I'll just hand over to my colleague to do her introduction.
Hello, I'm Rachel. I work for Groundwork Five Counties, who is one of the other partners running this program.
As mentioned, we are recording tonight's session, so you've got it as a point of reference, and it will be hosted on the Risk Ready Communities webpage. We've covered off introductions in the chat, which is great. There will be opportunities to share and discuss as we go through tonight's session. But just in the interest of avoiding any interference, if you can keep yourselves on mute just as we go through, that would be great. And then we will use the chat function and we'll sort of come off mute as and when those opportunities to share and discuss come up. So, just to put tonight's session into a bit of wider context, this webinar is part of the Risk Ready Communities programme, which is the community resilience programme that we are delivering in partnership with the local resilience forum to support communities to be better prepared for current and future risks. So, we are working with communities across Leicester, Leicestershire, and Rutland, working with them to develop their community response plans, which we're obviously focusing on tonight, but also a wide variety of other resources, events, and workshops as well coming your way. So, on to tonight's session, what we'll be looking at. Tonight's session is an introductory session focusing on community response plans. So, we will go through our understanding of community response plans, sort of setting the scene. We'll explore how to get started, what to include, and also how to think about kind of managing your plan sort of from an ongoing perspective. This is very much designed to be a supportive process, both sort of this evening. We want to make sure that we support and can provide sort of answers to questions and guidance. And hopefully, we've sort of designed tonight's session as a sort of step-by-step process. And also really encourage you to go at your own pace. You don't have to sort of do everything all at once. We've sort of designed it as a sort of process that you can follow and adapt in a way that works for you. So I will hand over to Rachel, who will take us through the first couple of sections.
Thank you, Alice. So, first of all, understanding community response plans. What is a community response plan? A response plan is a plan to prepare for, respond to, and recover from emergencies, which is developed locally. Co-produced by working together with local residents, groups, and other stakeholders, allowing you to make use of your local strengths and focus on local needs. In building a community response plan, you and the community identify the key risks you wish to prepare for, and to support this within the plan, you map out local resources, skills, contacts, and communication plans to be used in emergencies. Within that plan, you also can define roles and responsibilities for community members and volunteers and groups during an emergency. It is always important to remember that a community response plan should be a living document, regularly updated and tested through exercises to keep it effective. So, understanding community response plans in a wider resilience context. As Alice mentioned, Risk Ready Communities is being delivered in partnership with the Leicester, Leicestershire and Rutland Local Resilience Forum. The Local Resilience Forum is a partnership across multiple agencies, including Category 1 and 2 responders. The Local Resiliency Forum coordinates planning and preparedness activities for emergencies, which ensures a coordinated response and recovery across the area. Category 1 local authorities include Category 1 responders include local authorities, which in this case is Leicester City, Leicestershire County Council, Rutland County Council, and district councils, the emergency services, police, fire and ambulance, health bodies including the NHS and public health, and the Environment Agency. Category 2 are your utilities companies, so that's gas, electricity, water and telecoms. also the Met Office, Mining Remediation Authority, Transport, including highways, airports, and rail. And then others that are involved are organisations within the voluntary sector, such as the British Red Cross, Ministry of Defence, and Coroner's Office. Having local community response plans in place enhance official plans held by local authorities and emergency services by increasing local level preparedness and resilience. So you're not just listening to us all evening. We have a chance for a little bit of discussion. So feel free to put this in chat or raise your hand and unmute. So, what interests you about developing a community response plan? What has brought you here tonight, and what is triggering your interest in developing a community response plan? Are there particular risks that you think you want to prepare for? Are there particular people in that you've got in mind that you would like to support? Is your area one that you are worried about, particularly flooding? Is the heat waves that we've had in the last month or so, is that triggered any further thoughts beyond things that you might have already been thinking about regarding your community response plan? Just give it a moment and then we'll move on.
If anyone wants to come off mute, feel free if it saves you typing anything in the chat if you prefer.
Thank you, Anne. So you've been looking at it for a while, but contributing factors are increasing and you're trying to push it further. Absolutely, yeah. I can see that various factors coming into play. We'll touch on those again shortly. Okay, so if we move on to and wanting to know more about them. Absolutely. In the right place, Colin. Nice to see you. So, why develop a community response plan? So, to prepare for emergencies that might impact your community, as we've touched on briefly, current and future risks are increasing. We know this both from research and from our own lived experience. We've had two heat waves with health alerts in the last 6 weeks of each other, with another one potentially on the horizon. So they are currently rising. The risks that we are looking at are those found in the Community Risk Register, so that is flooding and severe weather, loss of utilities such as electricity or water, cyber attack, pandemic or disease outbreak, major traffic accidents, and acts of terrorism. So we know that when these happen, particularly on a larger scale, emergency services will need to prioritise risk to life and greatest need. So therefore, by having a community response plan in place, be able to help yourselves and your community to reduce impact across your community and those on the emergency services, and thereby helping the emergency services. Who can develop a community response plan? So, anyone at any stage, but the process does need to be collaborative. By being collaborative, both within a group and within the wider community, your community response plan will be the most effective it can be. Having the community response plan within a constituted group is preferable, both for longevity of a plan, but also for accessing, getting access to wider things outside of your community. And therefore, the majority tend to sit within parish councils. Now, the paper, obviously, those of you on the call tonight are already signed up to the idea of the concept of community response plan and knowing that they are important. But we are aware that obviously as you go out into the communities to try and build them, that you may come across some possible barriers and concerns. So we have put together some to try and help you break down and think of some answers towards that. So first one, it's not my job. Yes, but given the increasing number of emergencies and challenges, we all have a role to play, and by all playing a role, we can minimise the impact of these challenges. I pay my taxes. Absolutely, we all do. This is not about doing someone else's job that they are paid to do. This is about supporting ourselves, our communities to be better prepared, Coming together and supporting each other is what makes communities resilient and strong. Someone else will do that. Yes, but why not you? By taking an active interest in it, then you are going to make yourselves better prepared for that, and working with your community will also make you all stronger and more resilient. I don't want to get in the way of emergency services. Neither do we. It's about taking some safe, considered, and planned actions which support your communities to be better prepared and able to cope with an emergency that will also support and alleviating the wider pressure on emergency services themselves. We're not asking you to do anything that emergency services would be doing. I need qualifications, experience, prior knowledge, and resources. Well, this is what the Risk Ready Communities programme is here for. We will support you at whatever stage you are at to have the knowledge, skills, and resources. I am not insured to do that. This all depends on what activities you decide to take on within your plan, many of which won't need insurance. This will cost money. It might, but as part of the programme, we can connect you with teams who can help support with community grants to help you cover any costs that might arise. And finally, I've got more important things to think about. Yes, but hopefully you are starting to think, and by having those conversations with your communities, they will start to think about that there is a need to be better prepared, both individually and as communities, for emergencies, and that you all have a role to play within them. Some examples of community resilience already taking place across LLR. So these are a couple of villages that have set up community resilience groups and responses. So East Goscote flooded for the first time in January 2025. And in response, they set up a community resilience group, created a community response plan for the village. They now have volunteer wardens that do weekly patrols to check drains and waterways. And they were able to set up a dedicated resilience cabin following Charnwood Borough Council's flood locker grant scheme. And then Narborough and Littlethorpe, unfortunately, they flooded twice in 13 months. So they have set up a dedicated community response team, offering support during incidents, and they are exploring ways to reduce flooding. Okay, so now we're going to have a look at how we can develop your community response plans. Getting started. So, you're not alone in this. We are here to help you with that. First things first, we have produced on our website copies of our community response plan template and community response plan toolkit. They are both linked on our website, ready to download, and we will put a link for those into the chat at the end of this session. Further to that, the Risk Ready Communities team offers one-to-one support for your community and the group developing community response plan to support you, to help you build it, to test it, to take you all the way through. And through partnership with other local partners, we can find further support. So, getting started. Okay, so as previously mentioned, building your plan is a collective and collaborative process. So both working within a group, so setting up a group that you want to take it forward, and building that, and then also with your community as well to help look at your plan and build it thoroughly. When you've got your group together, you want to think about your purpose and focus. So what it is you want to achieve, what risks you're trying to protect against, what your focus is, what you think you can do within that. Once you've got that down, you want to start with asset mapping. And when you're doing that, you want to look at a strengths-based approach. So a strengths-based approach, looking at the things that your community is already good at, the assets and the things that they have already got going that works for them. So that you're not getting swamped down in getting worried about things that you haven't got. And the most important thing is to make a start and evolve it over time. You will always come back to it and look at what you can add in, what is new, what needs to be built upon. So your community response plan purpose. So once you've got your group together of people who can work well together and you've worked out, you've got the skills that you need and where you will meet, and hopefully have worked out how you are going to run your meetings, you want to ask yourselves, why are you developing a community response plan? What risks affect your community that you want to develop your response plan to respond to. What can your community response team realistically achieve? So don't think, oh, we've got to achieve everything all at once. Think about working at stages, which we will go into in more detail later. Think about who benefits from your community response plan, who you want to be reaching and who you want to be helping. And importantly, what won't you do? It's equally important to know what your capacity is and what you cannot do so that there is no confusion. And here we have just an example of a purpose. It's a rather broad, sort of a broad one, and you could use it as a start and then perhaps drill down into more specifics for your areas. So to help our community prepare for, respond to, and recover from emergencies while promoting measures that can reduce risk and impacts. So time for another brief discussion. So either in the chat or raise your hands and it'll come off mute. Feel free to talk to us. Could the purpose of your community response plan be? What could you aim to achieve? None of this is set in stone. There are no right or wrong answers. You just have a think about what you think you want your community response plan to be for and what you want to achieve. Obviously, also, if you've got any questions on anything that we've talked about so far, feel free to put them in the chat or unmute and ask them.
Just while you're thinking about that, I appreciate a couple of you have joined tonight just to find out a bit more. So while you might not be able to answer this question just yet, you can kind of have a bit of a think and share an initial kind of reflection. So don't feel put on the spot or under pressure with this question. Just sort of share where you're currently at, what you think could work for you currently.
That's great, Anne. That would be really good if you could build that as part of your outcomes for community response plan, building better community cohesion and getting them working together, both in terms of for response to emergencies, but also just generally across the village. I'm sure that would be great for both your community, but any other community that was able to build that. So, should we move on to looking at asset mapping? Sorry. So, asset mapping is identifying the strengths already in your community. So, these can be both physical and non-physical things, so such as communication or spaces and buildings. And then identifying the assets. When identifying your assets, are they visible in the community? Do people know about them? Do people know how to access them? This can be both, again, physical or non-physical. So, do people know if most of your communication is online? Have you got a way of bringing it offline for those who might not be online? And then when you are looking at your assets, identifying relationships you have with them. So if they are not part of your community response plan steering group, have you got relationships with them? Have you already spoken to them? Are they aware that you're looking something you are looking to build and that they might want to be part of? Or is it someone that you need to reach out to and start having that discussion? And remember again that this process is ongoing, so this will be something that you come back round to. Assets may become availability might increase or decrease depending on different things, and collaborative, working with the assets to see what they can offer to your community response plan. So, what is an asset? So we broadly these things can fall out of that, but we've broadly broke them down into 6 areas. So first one is people and skills. So that can be people that are just very good organisers, people who tapped into all the communities and really good at getting the word of mouth out, the message out through word of mouth. But it could also be more specific things like first aiders, organizations and networks. So that could be things like Women's Institute, but it could also and more formal organizations, but it could also just be things like a gardening club or a running club. They are spending time together and running things together and enjoying something together. They might be open to doing something more in their community. physical resources and equipment. So that could be things such as high vis torches, it could be radios, it could be anything that you think that you want to include in your plan, depending on what the actions you want to take when responding to emergencies. Buildings and spaces, so that can be things like your village halls, churches, libraries, any sort of public space or hall that is open to your community at some point, and how you might want to incorporate that in. Information and communication channels, so that could be newsletters, notice boards, magazines, any form of social media groups, any way in which you communicate with your community and get the word out about things going on in your community. And then finally, local businesses. So if you've got businesses in your local community, have they got assets? Have they got physical things that you might want to make use of in your plan? Have they got links with other people that would be useful? Have they got access to, or might they be able to get access to things that you want to include in your plan through their supply chains? So in effect, an asset is everything and anything that you can use in supporting your community, both at an emergency or at any other point. So we have a bit of a short activity. So again, obviously, as Alice said, I know a lot of you came along just to find out a bit more about community response plans. So don't feel any pressure to do this, but it might just be a useful exercise to just have a think, even if it's not the community that you work in, or the community that you live in. Have a think about, are there any assets in your community that you can think of that would be useful? Are there ones that you have relationships with, or any that you need to get in touch with? Have a few minutes. Again, feel free to put things in the chat or talk or raise your hand and come off mute and talk to us. But once again, no pressure. Just have a think and see if that would work for you. Just to share you one with from my local community. When I joined the program and I was looking at asset mapping as learning, I was having a look at my local community and I worked out that all my assets were in one particular, all my physical assets were in one particular area. And I thought, well, that could be interesting in terms of people accessing things that lived further out from them in an emergency. That's interesting, Anne. I mean, that's something we could set, something you certainly do. So having a bit of a trying to open it up to the wider community and chat, talking to people about what assets there could be. So Anne said that there are, she can think of the obvious ones, but not in terms, but not sure if things like paramedics and everything. Alex, can we just go back to the slide to what is an asset with the different ones? Thank you. Just so that Linda can have a quick look and
I think just to expand on your question, Linda. Um, appreciate you sort of shared your village came together for that sort of specific purpose, but I think within that there's obviously lots of sort of skills that you may have had in there, sort of organization, people collaborating, sort of lots of soft skills kind of coming through there. Um, and sort of coming together with that sort of unified purpose, really, which is sort of a lot of which you can translate into these activities and your community response plan. And I think just sort of broadening that out further and also kind of bringing in your point before and around sort of those the ones that you've shared are great, and just sort of expanding those. Have you got any really engaged networks like WhatsApp groups? Have you got a village Facebook group, which is sort of where everyone navigates typically for latest updates, communities, or it's a physical notice board? You've touched on some sort of skills that you might have already, which is great. It's also sort of thinking about those spaces which you've touched on, and sort of anything else that kind of basically what makes your community strong, unique, what kind of benefits your community, but also, and we'll come on to this in a moment, it's okay if you don't have those elements just yet, because that's sort of part of developing your plan will also be developing those assets. So kind of don't feel sort of disheartened or worried. Um, uh, yes, you've got Facebook groups, absolutely. So yeah, and you may want a specific one. But just on that, sometimes it's better. Obviously, you need to find the right balance, but sometimes it's better to go where the interest and the trust is already. Setting up a new Facebook group would be good, but it's only going to work if everybody gets on there and sort of uses it. And I think also remember that you've probably already done a lot of this, and we all have, but we don't necessarily realize it. During COVID, we all kind of came together to support each other. We sort of these things popped up like the WhatsApp groups for your street, people checking in on their neighbours. All of these sort of things are assets to our community, and they really sort of start to lend themselves as we sort of start to develop the community response plan. So hopefully lots of food for thought, and you've sort of already started to recognize what sort of you already have in your community, and we can kind of build from there. Is there any other reflections just before we move on, or any kind of questions just to sort of expand on, or just give a bit more clarity on we've just covered so far? Please do let us know.
I can see that Anne has experienced the local Facebook pages that I'm sure many of us have experienced as well. So not always a positive place to go to, but there are certain things on there that we could add. I'm just down the road. I'll switch my camera off, hang on, because it doesn't work together. I'm just down the road, Anne, in Ratby, so I do know your area quite well. And you know, yes, we'll probably share some of the same peoples. So yeah, okay.
Perfect. I will move us on to the next section. But please do feel free to ask any questions in the chat as we go through, and we can expand on any points. So just moving on to the next section, which is developing your plan. So we sort of started to think about understanding our assets, understanding kind of what we already have. So this is sort of when we would start moving into perhaps sort of putting the metaphorical pen to paper, and starting to develop your plan a bit more specifically. So as we've mentioned, there is an existing toolkit and template which helps guide this process, and it sort of takes you on a step-by-step process, which is what we're going to take you through tonight. And these sort of step-by-step processes ultimately make the plan, and we're here to support, and we can obviously answer any questions on it, and we've got lots of different examples within each step just to sort of help you start thinking about them. But appreciate that this sort of, as we go through these 10 steps, these may feel a bit overwhelming. It may feel like a long list of things to do. And I think that's where we really would encourage you just to sort of think about, well, making a start and sort of just giving it a go and then evolving it over time. So as we sort of touched on, it is an iterative process. There's lots of things within the plan that it would be good to sort of to get agreed and do collaboratively, but you don't necessarily have to do everything all at once. And that kind of purpose and focus that we outlined in the sort of getting started stage really does sort of help with that. So there's a bit of a sort of scale of how you can approach your community response plan. You might, for example, prefer just to focus on communication and awareness raising. So that's kind of building on those communication channels that we were just talking about, sharing with those kind of engaged groups of people. What are the key messages? What do people need to be aware of when it comes to risks in their community? How can we kind of warn and inform people sharing latest information? So that might be the first focus that you want to have for your community response plan. And then you might do sort of once you're feeling comfortable with that, you might want to evolve it over time and start thinking about, well, we've identified the sort of safe spaces in our community, those churches we touched on, the leisure centre, the libraries, any of those spaces that communities kind of gravitate towards. So how could we use those during an emergency? We might want to sort of open up those spaces to support our community, and we'll explore that in a bit more detail. But again, that's just sort of taking a bit more of an expanded approach to our community response plans. Or we would sort of then have all of the above, so kind of the awareness raising, using spaces, but also then we might think about having a group of emergency volunteers or flood wardens, just to sort of increase that response element to our plan. So that's why we're really encouraging you to sort of think about, well, what's the focus and the purpose, but also what do we feel comfortable with? And then you can kind of evolve it over time. So we're going to go through the sort of the 10 steps that make the full community response plan. But we'll sort of touch on this again at the end just to sort of reframe as well once we've sort of seen the plan in a bit more detail. So going through the 10 steps for your community response plan. So step 1 is the community response team. So hopefully you've already at this stage come together as a group to get started. So it's now that point where you want to formalize your group. So it's a sort of good point to include people, get people involved. So you've got that kind of clear direction and you're kind of all agreed on that purpose and that focus. And sort of within the asset mapping, and that's why it's sort of important to do it sort of to begin with, you understand, well, what already exists. So you're not kind of duplicating, you're not kind of recreating, you're able to develop and sort of grow what's already out there. So you might want to start thinking about sort of the roles that your community response team might take, but particularly that appointing a coordinator to steer the process. So like we were talking about earlier, sort of some of the organising forces that are in our communities, whatever that reason may be, whatever they're organising, those are really transferable skills to then sort of develop your community response plan, to sort of have someone to drive that process. And sort of build it from there, because appreciate it does take a bit of time and there's lots of competing focuses. So having a coordinator, having someone to drive that process is really beneficial. So then step 2 is thinking about your local risk assessment. So whilst you've sort of looked at your purpose and focus for the plan, you'll hopefully have started to think about, well, what are the risks that we might want to be prepared for? We might want to think about. You can consider local knowledge, experience and history. And then you sort of start to consolidate those into a risk assessment, which includes the risk itself, the impacts that it might have, and then taking what actions might you take that means you can either mitigate the risk or prepare for it or respond to it. So you can sort of start thinking about the impacts of risks as well. So for example, a power outage is an impact for a variety of different risks. So a power outage can be caused by a flood, by a storm, by a heat wave, or by infrastructure damage. So by preparing for a power outage, for example, you're actually also preparing for elements that might happen due to a flood or a storm or a heat wave. So thinking about those impacts is also really important. And also recognizing that not all risks are going to be experienced equally. Different people have different exposure levels or different vulnerabilities. So it's important to think broadly and include a wide variety of community members in developing your plan, so it reflects people's experience and people's needs. And also, we'll touch on sort of testing your plan a bit later, which is also another sort of real important element. So that's sort of step two. So you sort of start to have your risk assessment, and then you've started to map out the actions that you want to take to mitigate or prepare for or respond to those. And the risks, as I said, are we're looking at sort of through the program as the sort of community risk register, which Rachel touched on before. But if there are other risks that you want to prepare for, you can absolutely do that within your community response plan. So step three, local resources. So within your asset mapping, you'll have already identified lots of different resources. So we've touched on some already, those communication channels, the sort of Facebook groups, the WhatsApp groups, sort of specific skills. You might have first aiders, specific knowledge. We've touched on sort of the different elements that you might have, sort of tools or equipment. So this is then within the step three of your plan is about consolidating those and thinking about, okay, in those risks that we looked at in step two, and what those actions are that we want to take, what resources do we need, and making sure that we're thinking about any limitations or availability on those. So what if people are on holiday? What if we can't get access to a specific place? So sort of thinking about that within local resources. And also then thinking about, well, are there any gaps if you want to take any specific actions to respond for any particular risks? Do you have what you need? Are there gaps? Do you need to explore new skills, get some additional training, raise some money to get particular equipment, such as a generator? Ultimately, it all depends on the risks that you're preparing for and the actions you want to take. But you can start thinking about what you need, what you have, and what you might need to still get. So step four, places of safety. So this is then thinking about places in our community. We've touched on some of these already in your examples, which is great, but just sort of think about your own communities in a bit more detail. Where is it that your community currently kind of gravitate towards in terms of spaces and places in your community, and how could those be included in your community response plan? So take a few minutes to think about that, share it in the chat, come off mute, and we'll also make sure that we cover off any questions. That's a great question, Anne. I'll cover that off while others are thinking. It's a real sort of balance, really, because you want to sort of develop the plan with enough people so that it sort of already reflects the community and that you kind of it's as accurate and up to date as possible, but you don't necessarily want to have it as a design by committee, because then you've got too many voices and it becomes a big undertaking. So sort of we would probably recommend having a smaller group, such as a parish council, maybe kind of putting the call out to sort of say, hey, this is something we're doing. Are you interested? Come and get involved. And you can then perhaps form as a group, develop the sort of first draft. But that's then maybe when you then put it out to the community to say, this is something we've developed, come and have your say, or we're going to test it, get involved to see how it works. And we'll come on to that in a bit more detail. So it sort of depends really. If you've got an active and engaged group already that exists, that it probably makes sense to kind of build on that momentum. but also thinking about engaging people through previous experience. So, for example, the recent heat wave is all sort of still in our front of mind. So it's a good time to kind of get people thinking, well, actually, this community response plan would have put things in place so we were a bit more prepared for that heat wave. Or if you've got sort of past events, if you've sort of had flooding, or if you've been sort of impacted by a sort of significant major traffic incident. So a lot of sort of villages within Leicestershire are very close to big motorways and then get impacted by sort of significant events which may not be happening in your community, but you get the knock-on effects, sort of huge amount of traffic coming through, kind of other impacts. So there's lots of different ways to engage people, and it's sort of about sort of it will kind of depend on where your community's at particularly. But it is something that we also will be exploring a bit more in risk ready communities as well, sort of engaging your communities yourselves. Hopefully that's answered your question. I appreciate that was probably a little bit of a long-winded answer. And I can see you've shared about the places you've got. I know you said you only have a community centre, church, pub in each village, but actually that's lots. That's lots of things. There's lots of different places, and they can all have different roles, different functions. That's a great place to sort of to start from. Absolutely. That just building on the sort of point before, it's a really good point, Linda, around that kind of risk of a top-down approach. Definitely want to avoid that. So it is about giving people the opportunity. I guess it's finding that balance of giving people the opportunity to get involved, perhaps sort of running a community meeting, getting people, but not letting um the sort of it delay or mean that you don't actually make progress. So it's that kind of fine balance of yes, getting people involved, but not it's not really feasible to have the entire community drafting the plan and inputting, but they can absolutely support with testing it. They can provide insights and reflections. So it's always being updated, always being kind of changed. So well, we'll come on to that in a bit more. Just going back to places of safety, again, sort of, yeah, lots coming through. So libraries, Age UK Cafe, that's great. And sort of also recognizing the sort of other places in other communities as well. And Colin, you're absolutely right. A really important point there coming through. For those of you who haven't seen it in the chat, places of safety may not be the same for each community. So a community centre at the bottom of the hill is not a place for during a flood. So absolutely, definitely a good idea to have different places of safety. And just sort of going back to your asset mapping, having a look at the geographical kind of the literal map of your community. So when you're thinking about your assets, plotting things like the physical assets on a map. So thinking about, well, where are your places of safety? Doing exactly what you've just done. Well, yes, it's great that we've got a community centre. The community centre has everything we need, but it's at the bottom of the hill. So we probably shouldn't rely on that alone. We can use that, for example, maybe in a heat wave because it stays nice and cool, but it's not the one we want to think about when it comes to flooding. It's having lots of different options, and then going back to the earlier sort of step with actions, and sort of how you'll use those resources. It's then sort of making sure in those exactly what you've just done has identified a limitation with that place of safety. Yes, it's useful. It's got, say, the community centre's got things like a kitchen, toilets. So it's a great place, but it's at risk of flood. So that's an important thing to be capturing, so that you've got a wide variety of resources, but you've also already done a risk assessment for those assets as well. So no, a really, really important point. So thank you for sharing that. Anything else? Oh, yeah, come in.
I was going to say, Alice, on that, it was really, I was typing and I got caught out. definitely, as a number of places are really good. In the Ratby and Kirby Muxloe gas outage, obviously we had a number of spaces and places being used by services as well. So there was a library being used by one group of people, a village hall being used by another, there's sports ground in between Ratby and Kirby Muxloe being used by somebody else, something at the pub being used, even though we didn't have gas, but it was where people all came together and got different things. So whilst it was said by Anne that they've only got those, I think they're really good that they have got those as well. So yeah, and everybody, that practical common things about what we've got. And Linda, you seem to have an awful lot. I don't know where you are, but yeah, it's very good to see those things that you're thinking about what's available.
Thanks, Christy. Anything else? I think we've covered everything in the chat, so I'll move us on. But please do feel free to keep sharing and ask any questions. So we've kind of touched on all of this, which is great through our discussions. You've mentioned all of our examples, which is great. I guess to sort of expand on that as well is thinking about, well, where is the community trust? Where does that already exist and what's sort of already used? There's no point in trying to get people to go and use a space that just isn't used. It's not part of the community already. So it's sort of thinking about all of those elements that we were just talking about. So the limitations around the physical space, but also, is it a place that the community instinctively want to use and trust? We've touched on those logistical considerations, thinking about kind of the facilities, but also another one with those sort of places is the time of year. So you may want to use, as well as sort of possible flood risk, you may also want to think about, well, what spaces make more sense in hot weather because they stay nice and cool, such as a church, versus in the winter where has a really good sort of heating system and we can easily keep people warm and things. So thinking about those sort of in the wider context, again, putting those places of safety in the context of the risks and hazards that you want to prepare for and the actions that you want to take. So moving into more of the sort of response elements of your plan. So we've sort of touched on so far all of the sort of the planning, the mapping, kind of consolidating what have we got, how might we use it. So then when it comes to activating your plan, it's thinking about, well, what triggers might need to happen for you then to sort of to activate. Ultimately, this will depend on what the focus is and the actions that you want to take. But for example, it could be severe weather warnings. So for example, if you had a community response plan that particularly wanted to raise awareness about heat waves, we know that there is a possible, we're starting to get the kind of early warnings of a possible heat wave again coming next week. So that would be a possible point where you go, okay, we've got those severe weather warnings. We want to start thinking about activating our plan. We want to sort of start thinking about what we need to do. Also, that might include a flood alert if flooding is a specific risk you want to prepare for. Or something might have kind of happened unexpectedly, like a power outage. So you may have a power outage and you may then need to respond to that accordingly. The flip side of that, but is also still really important, is making sure that you're aware and agreed when you would not activate your plan. Again, this needs to be pre-agreed, communicated, and respected. So it's about thinking about, well, that might be you've not actually prepared for the risk that's happening, so you just don't have that in your plan. You're not in a position to respond to that. It might be something happening that's hyper local, so it's obviously impacting a few people, but it's not necessarily a community wide challenge. So you don't necessarily need to activate your plan as a community response. It's sort of there's just a local need. Or it's not safe for you to activate. So thinking about kind of keeping anyone involved safe and really kind of thinking about that. So ultimately, these trigger points will depend on the actions that you're taking, the focus that you've got, but it's just really important to make sure that you're really clear on when you will and when you won't Activate, both from a kind of keeping things organized and straightforward, but also for keeping people safe as well. So building on that, step 6 is initial actions. So while sort of you can't necessarily plan for everything, and let's be honest, all the best plans in the world, we will never have planned for the thing that actually happens, but you can have a sort of a plan in place for those initial actions that you might take, just so you're not having to work them out and agree them in the moment. You've kind of pre-agreed, you've got a plan in place, and you know where to sort of start things off. Again, it will depend on what you want to do, what you're focusing on, but these might include having a pre-agreed time and place for an initial meeting, a process for calling out your team members, an initial appraisal of the situation, or liaising with the local resilience forum. So it sort of depends what you're going to be doing. And again, you don't need to sort of plan every single eventuality. This isn't about having a list of every single action you're going to take, because that's impossible. It is about thinking about those early actions that we can take just to kick things off, to mean that you've got that kind of pre-agreed, planned for, and organized kind of list of steps to take. Response team roles and actions. So this is step 7. So this is sort of bringing together a number of the other previous steps. So once you've worked out the actions that you want to take, and you've got your kind of your team formed, you can then start allocating roles and responsibilities, and sort of having those pre-agreed to ensure that things can operate smoothly. It depends on what you're asking people to do, but it could include awareness raising, knowledge and information sharing, clearing up during kind of recovery, or other sort of non-emergency support, sort of community engagement. And just make sure that you'll need to think about kind of the training that might be required with any of these roles and responsibilities, making sure that you've sort of thought about the procedures that you might need to have in place, and making sure that the person taking on that role has the capacity to do so, the capability, but also is feeling comfortable and ready themselves. Step 8 then, emergency kit. So back to you all to have a bit of a think about what items might you need to support your community response plan activities. So things that would be items that would be useful to have in your emergency kit. I'll give you a moment to think about some of those, share them in the chat. Emergency lighting, absolutely. And how are you planning on powering said lighting, out of interest, Colin? Perhaps with a generator, maybe. Rechargeable batteries, yes, absolutely. Radios, yes. That's great. Thanks, Linda. Non-perishable food, bottled water, blankets, fans, signage. Absolutely. Sort of how are you going to communicate kind of the things, the information that you might need to communicate, having that prepared ahead of time. That's great. Any other suggestions? I'll move us on. But do add any more that you come up with to the chat. We've covered lots of these, which is great. So just a few other examples. So things like, communication equipment, so kind of radios, local area information, so having printouts of maps and contacts, especially if you think about if there's a power outage, you can't just necessarily quickly Google or kind of get online, and things like that. high vis and PPE, so just sort of making sure that you're staying safe and that you're protected. Food and water, absolutely, but just making sure you're thinking about kind of use by dates on those. Torches with spare batteries, absolutely, sort of not forgetting kind of power banks or anything that kind of helps power things if there is a power outage. First aid kit, sanitation supplies, and absolutely sort of clipboards, pens, relevant stationery. It's not the time to not be able to find a pen. We all know how annoying that is at the best of times, but let's not do that in an emergency. Considerations then think about, well, where are you going to store this emergency kit, and how are you going to access it? So making sure that it's stored safely but still accessible. Thinking about, well, do you need to update that kit? Is there things that are missing when you sort of once you've assembled it or started using it, making sure that you're kind of charging things back up if you've used them, and thinking about sell by dates or use by dates, both on food and water. But I've seen in the chat, which is actually a really important point, sort of lots of things have sell by dates, like first aid kits as well, like sort of the sanitation supplies and PPE more broadly. So sort of making sure that you're thinking about that, and that's sort of one of the elements that will kind of come into your community response plan management, which we'll touch on in a moment. So step 9 is emergency contact list. So this is thinking about, well, who might you need to contact in an emergency? That might be at your community level, so kind of your community contacts, your team members, kind of important kind of contacts in the community who can get the message out, but also it might be wider contacts, so making sure that you know how to contact you utility providers, local businesses, services, and also kind of places of safety contacts. So thinking about all of the different contacts, having their contact details, thinking about any limitations, kind of is that a 9 to 5 kind of hour, is that a 9 to 5 phone number? Is it only during the week? How do you contact people out of hours? Things like that. So sort of thinking through those logistics and considerations as well. So step 10 is then practicing and reviewing your plan. So by this point, you have got a fully drafted plan, which is great, but it's important to think about keeping that document live. It's a sort of a plan that's a living document, and sort of keeping it updated over time, both sort of when you've exercised it or perhaps you've activated it. But even if you haven't, it's just good to keep it up to date, reflecting on anything that sort of might have changed over the sort of last 6 to 12 months. And things when you're kind of considering reviewing your plan, what might you need to think about? So if you've exercised or used your plan, what went well, but also what could have been better? What would you have needed? What would have been useful to have? Kind of that might be connections and networks and relationships, but that also might be part of your emergency kit. So there's lots of different ways that things that you might have needed. Did people know what to do? Did the plan itself actually work? Did you have the training in place? Did you have the resources you need? And was the plan itself kind of user friendly? Have we got the right level of information? Thinking back to those sort of initial actions, have we made it a bit too complicated, or have we made it kind of a bit too simple and we haven't kind of thought it through? So lots of different considerations. And as part of Risk Ready Communities and the programme, we can support with sort of working with our wider resilient stakeholders within the LRF. We can support with a tabletop exercise. So once you have a draft plan in place, we can do a sort of an exercise which sort of hypothetically puts the plan through its paces, just to sort of test, well, does it work? How did it work? And to our earlier discussion, that might be a good opportunity to get wider members of the community involved. So perhaps you've reached step 10, you've got the first fully drafted version, so you've got something for people to respond to. But before you finalize it, you want to kind of get that wider community engagement, wider community input, so you can kind of test and learn And that might be where you get people involved. So you've got, by this point, a fully drafted, tested plan. There are other things that you sort of just need to think about and consider. So as we've sort of said, making a start and then evolving it over time. If you think back to the scales that we looked at earlier on the community response plans, sort of the different options around that sort of, so hopefully you can sort of start to see how these sort of take shape. So you can have that community response plan, but the actions that you want to take are really focused on community awareness raising, checking in with others, warning, informing. So those actions and the resources are all really based on communication and awareness raising. Perhaps you want to use those safe spaces that we've talked about, and again, we've had great discussion on those, sort of identifying some of the limitations, some of the things we might need. So thinking about, well, how can we then use those spaces within our plan? Or you might want to sort of do a full community response plan and really sort of use awareness raising. You can use spaces, but also kind of explore having a group of volunteers or flood wardens. So those are sort of the different levels, different scales, sorry. But it's hopefully reassures you that you don't have to have everything all at once. You can kind of explore it in a way that works for you. And that's sort of why we do encourage, when you're getting started, thinking about asset mapping, thinking about your focus and the purpose that you want to have, just will help you think about that more broadly. Other things to think about is sustaining interest and focus over time. So we know, obviously, we may get lots of interest to develop the plan, but then if it doesn't get used, plan interest may sort of peter out. People get sort of focused on other things, which is fair enough. So how can you integrate ways to keep people interested in community resilience, community preparedness, and sort of things. And that's something that we will hopefully be able to support with as well through Risk Ready Communities. In all likelihood, although you doesn't need to be, the community response plan may be being developed within the parish council. So a number of these will be kind of managed within the parish council, so sort of training requirements, procedures and governance that you might need to have in place, sort of insurance and GDPR. If you're not developing a plan within your parish council, that's absolutely fine. It just means that you need to sort of make sure you're thinking about these elements as well. And obviously you do still need to think about them as a parish council, but chances are you've got these in place. So sort of things to consider sort of once you get to this stage, but rest assured we will be able to support with all of these through Risk Ready Communities. So don't let these be a barrier, don't let these be a reason that you don't start developing your plan. Get going, give it a go, and then when things crop up, we can absolutely support with that. With that in mind, where to next? So you've attended tonight's session. You've made a start with considering community response plans. So we will put the toolkit and the template in the chat shortly. And so you can then take a look at those along with the recording once it's ready. And so just start having a go, perhaps getting your group together, start sort of putting that plan in place, start sort of evolving it over time, getting it on people's radar. If this is something that you want to explore in more detail and you want some support, that's great. That's what we're here for. So get in touch with us directly. You can either do that via the Risk Ready Communities webpage, or we will give you our contact details, myself and Rachel's email address, so you can get in touch with us directly and we can work with you one-to-one and support you developing your community response plan. But also make sure you're staying connected to Risk Ready Communities. We're going to have lots more on offer. We are running this programme at least until May next year, but probably hopefully for longer than that. But there will be lots more coming your way, particularly in the autumn. Things to look out for will be our webinar on utilities outages, a webinar on household preparedness, and also to our earlier discussion, So hopefully this will be of interest around sort of how can you yourselves engage your communities? How can you maintain that interest? How can you how can we support you? You've come tonight, you're already engaged. How do you then in turn engage your communities yourselves? So watch this space, make sure you're connected with Risk Ready Communities, and see what else we've got on offer. We've got a bit of time left before we let you go back to your Thursday evenings. So if there's any final questions, do let us know. Yeah, so we'll share the slides and you'll have the recording as well. So you've got those as a point of reference. Linda, that's great that you're going to take it back to your parish council. Please do let us know. Something we've been doing within kind of the programme is Rachel and myself have been attending lots of parish council meetings. So if that would be of use, if you would like us to come along to support with sort of presenting a bit more about risk ready communities, sort of why develop a community response plan, please do let us know, because we're very happy to come and support with that and help get other people bought in. But it's great that that's already an action you're planning on taking. That's brilliant. Our email addresses are in the chat now, but we will also send the slides out, so you've got our contact details that way as well. Perfect. Well, I think I can't see any other questions in the chat, so hopefully we've covered everything off. But thank you all for your time. Thank you for joining. And we look forward to hopefully seeing you on a future session or coming to see you in person to help you develop your community response plan. But yeah, thank you all for your time and have a good rest of your evening.